Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and obesity, and I'm going to talk about placements and transits that may manifest in this. And the thing about it is, the first off, I want to talk about the basics and fundamentals of obesity, people being overweight. The first thing is, we understand the sun and the ascendant are two main proponents associated with the physical body. So if somebody has the sun or their ascendant and the zodiac signs of Taurus, Cancer, Sagittarius, or Pisces, they could have a little greater propensity than average to have obesity. And the thing about this is, Taurus, of course, is they like to indulge in their sweets and their good food, and they take pleasure in eating. I have Taurus rising, so I know something about this. And zodiac sign Cancer, of course, is synonymous with food, so you can understand why they can be prone to be heavier than average. And going back to Taurus, Taurus is also more of a sedentary, stagnant type, so that plays a little bit overall with Taurus being a greater tendency toward being obese and overweight. Sagittarius is, they're known to be a very large zodiac sign on average, ruled by the benefic Jupiter. Jupiter, largest planet, I believe, in the solar system, and being governed by it. Sagittarius likes things on a large scale, and that could even be what they indulge in. And Pisces could have a tendency to gain weight as well. They are co-ruled by Neptune and Jupiter. Sometimes it could be attributed to alcohol in some cases with Pisces. Pisces has a little greater propensity toward that than the other zodiac signs. And Pisces is, they could be about isolation and seclusion, and they could be similar to Taurus that way in terms of at times being sedentary, because Pisces, Pisces can be somewhat lethargic as well, and they're often about their daydreaming, they're fantasizing, and they are the opposite sign of Virgo. So, and also too, if you have let's say Jupiter is the planet that's known for obesity. If you have Jupiter conjunct your ascendant, your sun, ascendant and sun again are two proponents. The two associated strongly with the physical body, and the ascendant is what dominates the physical appearance in the physical body, but the sun can play a role in that as well. And the thing about it is, or even if Jupiter conjuncts the moon, because the moon can be associated with the stomach and water, and you're talking about retention of water. This is there could be a greater tendency to put on weight and have obesity in those instances. Now, the thing about it is, also, if somebody's experiencing a transit or progression, as far as what I just described, they have transit Jupiter hitting their first house cusp, their first house. If somebody has Jupiter on the ascendant, that's going to be a little bit more intense than it simply being in the first house and not conjunct the ascendant. If somebody has Jupiter conjunct their ascendant and the first house, that could be a little greater intensity toward gaining weight. Remember, as I've spoken about in previous videos, Jupiter could be rather paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. It can enlarge and expand the waistline. Now, there's some aspects I want to talk about which can be indicators of obesity as well. If somebody has Jupiter making an adverse aspect to their Venus, that could be a distorted need for indulgence. Venus can be about foods that we take pleasure in, that we like to indulge in. Jupiter, of course, can be enlargement, and you're talking about distorted energy. It can give and Jupiter could be about excess as well. So it could give an excessive need for that, for indulging in those foods that we find pleasurable. Now, also, too, the moon can play a role in this as well. The moon can be associated with food. If somebody has the moon in their first house, this could affect the appearance to some degree, and it could indicate a heavier person than average. And say if somebody has more of a slender ascendant on average, say like a Gemini or a Capricorn rising, but they have the moon in their first house, and especially if it conjuncts the ascendant, there might be a little greater tendency or propensity toward weight gain, being a little heavier than otherwise indicated. If the moon is strongly afflicted, it could also be an indicator of some issues with food, which wouldn't exclude weight gain and obesity. Let's say, for example, if somebody has the moon in their chart making an adverse aspect to their natal Pluto, this could be an indicator perhaps of somebody that might have an obsession and a fixation with eating. And if that's the case, of course, there could be more greater proclivity to put on weight. It could be some compulsive issue maybe associated with their food, or some eating disorder. Now, you're talking about now, if the moon makes an adverse aspect to one's natal Neptune, sometimes this could be about an addiction to food, because Neptune, of course, can be associated with addictions. You're talking about also, Venus is another proponent in astrology that may be tied into obesity and weight gain, because Venus is associated with the food that we could be enamored with, that we truly enjoy. And if it's really afflicted, it might give some issues with that food that we strongly enjoyed. If it makes an adverse aspect to our natal Neptune, as an example, it could be an indicator of being addicted to those real succulent sweets. If it makes an adverse aspect to your natal Pluto, this could be more of a fixation or obsession to have those foods that are very that you really find very enjoyable. Could also be another thing I want to talk about as far as houses go. Well, the fourth house is correlates and corresponds with the zodiac sign Cancer and the moon, and so the fourth house can be associated with food. If somebody, say, has Jupiter in their fourth house in their natal chart, that can enlarge and expand issues with food. If somebody has the ruler of their fourth house, say in their 12th house of addictions, or even the reverse, let's say they have the ruler of the 12th house in their fourth house of food, this could be another indicator of some addiction that might be tied in with eating, and which wouldn't exclude weight gain. And if you're talking about, or also if the ruler of the fourth house is strongly afflicted, that could be another indicator of food issues again, which wouldn't exclude matters connected with obesity and excessive weight gain. Now, another thing is that when we look at this, there's other things you can look at too. If you have, I mean, the 12th house is the house associated with Pisces and addictions. If you have the moon or Venus or even Jupiter in the 12th house, that could be an indicator of some addiction that can be associated. I mean, Jupiter is again about obesity. You're talking about the moon as food. Moon in the 12th house could be an indicator of a food addiction, and Venus can be about the food that we really love to enjoy and we are enamored with. So somebody that has Venus in the 12th house in their natal chart may have an addiction to that kind of food, which of course indulging in that food excessively can lead to weight gain, especially if the person is a very sedentary person. And another thing too is that if you have, I mean, there can be indirect aspects that could be attributed to weight gain and obesity. Let's say that somebody has their natal Neptune making an adverse aspect to their natal Mars, their Sun, or their ascendant. This could be an aspect connected with lethargy and feeling more like daydreaming and fantasizing as opposed to actually doing. Neptune can be associated with lethargy, with stagnation, with really just wanting to really daydream and just kind of relax and not really do a whole lot. And you might not always have the energy to do what you really want to do. And if that's the case, then that could lead to obesity, because stagnation, of course, can do that. Person that is not very active, of course, can have a greater proclivity toward weight gain. Now, there's some other things I wanted to get it. The main last thing I was going to get at is that there's some degrees in astrology that might give a greater proclivity toward weight gain. Some of you may have heard there was a book by renowned astrologer A.T. Mann. It was called something like The Round Art, the Astrology of Time and Space, and it gave a certain a specific appearance for every 5 degrees of the zodiac. And there's some 5 degree intervals he gave, which can be, propensity toward heaviness, toward being fleshy, toward which wouldn't exclude obesity. There was one interval he talked about Taurus at 20 to 25 degrees, and in that description he had written a fleshy body was included in that little description for that interval. Taurus can have a tendency to be heavy anyway, but it might be more emphasized and pronounced in that interval. And he also had stated, if I remember right, you got to check and confirm this, but Gemini 12th degree, he wrote fat, meaning, heavy. That could be a heavy, according to that book, that could be what he wrote, that could be a degree of of being heavy, basically, of fleshiness. And he also had the zodiac, for as far as the zodiac sign Cancer, between 0 to 5 degrees can be, he wrote something about fleshiness, or fleshy body he had written for that interval. And then for Sagittarius at 10 to 15 degrees, he had in the description, it stated something about either heaviness, fleshiness, or something. I think it was something like, quote, full fat face and body, end quote. So that is, that was another interval, which could be inclined toward heaviness. And he also had Pisces at 25 to 30 degrees, which is really Pisces 25 degrees to 29 degrees, 59 minutes of arc. He said something like, quote, sometimes excessively fat, end quote. And I'm not trying to sound derogatory by using the word fat, but that I'm just quoting what I remember from that book. And you want to check on that and confer what's, as far as that goes. Again, that name of that book is something like The Round Art, the Astrology of Time and Space. And hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. There's like want to talk about an example of somebody I knew one time very close with. There's a female that had a Cancer ascendant, and just as an example through this chart where it could indicate, tendency toward being toward obesity, being much heavier than average. She had a Cancer ascendant. She also had Jupiter in the zodiac sign Cancer in the first house of the physical body. And the Jupiter in Cancer was also involved in a cardinal T-square configuration, which included the Sun. And the Sun, of course, can be associated with the physical body as well. And the Sun also squared, at least a long square, I believe, a loose square, to her Cancer ascendant. So these are, and you're talking, I mean, this is a situation, I mean, you're talking about people that have, I mean, you got to really look at the whole chart and understand as far as physique goes. I mean, somebody with a, Pisces Sun and Jupiter in the first house, you might feel they're going to be heavier than average. They may be, but if they have a Capricorn, say Capricorn, Aries, Virgo, Gemini rising, that will modify things as well, and they probably at least won't be as heavy as otherwise indicate. And keep in mind too that also progressions of one's ascendant might give some propensity toward weight gain. Somebody that goes from their Aries ascendant natally and it progresses into Taurus might be inclined toward weight gain, or Scorpio progressing into Sagittarius can be another example of somebody that might be putting on weight during that period. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.